Hi, my name is Robert Goodspeed with Goodspeed Inspection Services, and today I'd like to go over a 10-minute tip with you on foundation maintenance and try to give you a little bit of education on what exactly a foundation is here in Houston and metropolitan areas, this southeast part of Texas generally, and how things that you can do to take care of your foundation to try to help ensure that you don't have enough movement in the future that you're going to have foundation repair of some kind. There are really three types of foundations in this part of the country, and it can vary, but the majority of our foundations are monolithic post-tensioned concrete. That's probably 90% of the foundations here in the Houston area, from the Woodlands all the way down to Baytown and Katy. And so the second type of foundation would be a concrete steel reinforced foundation, and that's they use that typically in areas where there's known to be a lot of foundation movement. And then the lastly would be a pier and beam, and that's typically in older parts of town, inside 610 in Houston, and in some of the rural properties where it's a little easier to build actually. So the first one is the monolithic post-tension slab, and that's extremely common. That's what we've got in all of our subdivisions more or less, and throughout Houston, probably from the 1960s and on, and prior to that it would have been in concrete, steel reinforced, or a pier and beam home. But the monolithic post-tension slab, that is, I explain it kind of like this: if you were to take a frozen waffle and squish it down in the mud, pull that out, and the impression that it leaves in the dirt is what your foundation looks like underground. Now this is all the subdivisions in Houston. I'm generalizing, but more or less all the subdivisions in Houston, and it's flat on top. The concrete is as thin as 4 inches in some areas, and it's no deeper than 24 inches or so along the perimeter, along the grade beam, and then the structural grade beams through the middle of the house. So it's kind of set up in a grid pattern, even if you've got an oddly shaped home. So they pour the concrete. Once the concrete sets up, 7 days or so, they come out and they tension these steel cables that are embedded in the concrete, and they tension these with these big hydraulic jacks, and it's got a dead head at one side, and then it's inside a sleeve. This steel cable's inside a sleeve, and at the other end they grab onto it with a hydraulic jack. They pull that kind of like a spring or a rubber band, I guess, kind of like pulling that rubber band tight, and they lock it into place. And when they've done all 2 sides, because it's 2 sides are fixed and the other 2 sides are floating, once they do all of those, the concrete is being pushed towards the center from all sides, and that makes the concrete very, very strong. It's engineered, because it's someplace it's only 4 inches thick, right? So it's very strong, very springy, and makes for a quick and easy, a very efficient use of concrete. They don't have to use a lot of concrete this way. So that's the first one. The other one is more or less a steel reinforced concrete, and that's where they form it up and they put lots of reinforcing rebar steel throughout the slab, along the grade beams and overlapping in the middle. And that's typically done in areas where they really need a stiff foundation. They don't want a whole lot of movement in that foundation. The reinforcing makes that concrete just very rigid. So they do that where they know they have a lot of movement. It's very common in Bel Air, Texas, for one. And then the last is a pier and beam, and that's we're going to find those with older homes, 70-year-old homes, 100-year-old homes here in Houston. That's inside 610 or in rural properties. So now, the way they choose those 3 foundations is the type of soil that you have typically. Well, I say that's the way they should choose which foundations to use, but a lot of times they just flat out scrape off the grass, scrape off the topsoil, and form it up for a post-tension slab, and off they go. They probably did some engineering of some soil evaluation for the subdivision, but generally they're just going to build them the same way. That's just the way it is. So if we know we have movement, they're going to go with a higher end homes. We'll go with a steel reinforced, but we still see multi-million-dollar homes with post-tension slabs. So you just never know. So here in Houston, we have a lot of what's called expansive clay soil, and what that is there's a lot of clay in the soil, and that clay, well, when clay gets wet, it expands, and when clay gets dry, it shrinks. So moisture is a huge deal for foundations here. So I tell people all foundation movements caused by moisture. Take out fault lines. All foundation movements caused by moisture. Not enough moisture, too much moisture, trees drinking the moisture, water leaks under the house, drainage problems. So all foundation movements caused by moisture. So if you remember that and think about that when you're thinking about what you should do to maintain your foundation, it makes it really easy. So because of that expansive clay, when it gets wet, it expands, and when it gets dry, it shrinks. So if you think of your house as a big floating boat, if you will, big square floating barge, and the southern side of the house gets a lot of sunlight, the eastern side of the house gets very little hot sunlight because the sun comes up in the east. It doesn't get really hot till it gets into the south, and then when it gets in the south, the sun really beats down on the south and the west sides of the house. And as it's beating down on the soil, it's drying the soil out. I mean, we get extremely hot here in Houston. Sometimes we get really wet, sometimes we don't. So it's very difficult to control the dryness. If I ask you to dry out your soil around the house, you really can't do that, more or less. I mean, Mother Nature takes care of it by the sun beating down on the soil. But if I asked you to control the moisture or add moisture around the house, very easy, right? You turn on your sprinkler system, you grab the water hose or soaker hose and water the foundation. So here in Houston, this part of the country, we say you need to water your foundation. You need to water your foundation. Does that mean go out spraying a hose on the concrete slab? No, not at all. What that means is we want you to control the moisture in the soil. And that it's the only way you can really do that is by adding moisture all the way around the house. By a sprinkler system, for one. Sprinkler systems are the best. If you have a sprinkler system around the house, you're going to have constant, even moisture around the house on all four sides. So you might not water as much on the north side because that side doesn't dry out very much, and maybe not so much on the east side, but you're definitely going to add some water on the south and west side, the hot sides of the house. And that moisture keeps that clay expanded, keeps that clay open, and it doesn't let it shrink. So back to that boat analogy, the barge analogy. So if you have moisture all the way around four sides of your house, and it stays kind of wet on the north side because it never gets any sun, stays a little bit wet on the east side because it doesn't get that hot of sun, but it dries out on the south and west side, well, then your house could tilt, let's say. That clay shrinks, and it doesn't hold up the foundation on that side of the house, and literally your house can sink on that side of the house. So that's what we want to do, is we want to add moisture around the perimeter of the house. And the other things that cause this moisture, lack of moisture or drying out, are trees, deciduous trees, trees that have leaves that fall off at some point. Here, most of our trees hold their leaves, 10 months out of the year, but still a deciduous tree, like an oak tree or a Arizona ash. Some of those two trees are not good for your foundation. They drink a lot of water, and the root system, if you have limbs over your house, then you're going to have roots under your house, and those roots are drinking water, and they're removing moisture from the soil, drying out that clay, and allowing the clay to shrink, so not holding up your house. The roots are also obviously bad for your sewer pipes. They get into your sewer pipes. The root that starts the size of a human hair and can get through tiny fissures in your sewer pipes, and then gets inside there and can turn it into a giant root ball inside your sewer line and cause sewer problems, damaged pipes. Well, that's again another factor of foundation movement are sewer pipes under the house that are damaged, leaking, adding too much moisture under the house. So again, foundation all goes back to water. Too much water, sewer leaks, water leaks, not enough water, droughts, trees. So you need to be thinking about these things year round. If we ever get into a drought, which happens here in Houston, then you need to water your soil to the letter of the law. If we're in water rationing and they say you can water your yard, 10 minutes every other day, then you need to water your soil 10 minutes every other day. And I'm not talking about keeping your grass green. I'm not talking about keeping your flower beds green. I'm talking about watering the soil around the perimeter of the house, keeping that soil moist as you can constantly. And that takes a long time to get moisture down deep in the soil where the clay is. And that's what we're trying to keep moist, is that clay. So you can't just go out with a hose one day and think you've taken care of it. You need to either have that water on a soaker hose with a timer where it comes on every day, every other day, and waters for so long, or a sprinkler system that comes on every other day and waters for 10-15 minutes each day, so around the perimeter of the house. So that helps tremendously with protecting your foundation. So some other things you can do is make sure that you have good, proper drainage around your house. That the way your house is supposed to, the yard is supposed to drain around the house is within 10 feet of the house, the soil should drain away from the house. So within 10 feet, none of the soil should be drained so that it comes towards the house. It needs to go away from the house so that we're not having water stand straight up against the house, because that saturated soil makes that clay expand and can cause foundation problems. So you want it to drain towards the fences, drain towards the backyard. Most of these subdivisions are set up so it drains left and right to the fence line, and the backyard drains to the middle, and those all hit the fence line and drains out front. That's typically how it works in Houston. So make sure you have good, proper, positive drainage away from the house. So that's one thing that you can do. Trim trees. Like trim trees, you don't really want trees above the house. It may shade your roof and all that, but if it touches the roof, it's going to damage the roof. So you want those trees to be trimmed away from the house, and trying to encourage the roots not to be heading under the house, if you will. So that's another thing you can do. So now I'd like to talk to you also about gutters, downspouts and gutters around your house. Back in years ago in the 70s, I believe, that's before I started doing inspections. I started in 96, but I've been told that the FHA and VA back in the day required gutters around the house. And today that's not a requirement. Gutters are a great idea. It does help control moisture around the house, but it can also cause problems also. If you think about it, your roof is let's say it's a rectangle, just a regular old rectangle, nothing fancy. All the gutters, typically they head to the corners, right? The gutters drain towards the corners. There's a downspout, and the downspout goes down the corner and out. So you're not getting, remember, we want constant moisture around the house, constant even moisture around the house. And with downspouts, that doesn't really give you that. So what I find in my experience is that sometimes lack of a sprinkler system giving us constant even moisture around the house, no sprinkler system, and gutters going to the corner, that now we've got moist spots at all the corners, and those moist spots are more moist than elsewhere. Our soil dries out very quickly. You'd be amazed. Here in Houston, we get 80 inches of rain or something a year, but sometimes we get it all in 3 days, right? So the soil doesn't have an opportunity to be constantly moist around the house. And the soil's got so much clay in it, you can literally go out on a hot summer day where we haven't had a lot of rain, and there's cracks in there wide enough where you could drop your wallet in it, right? Or the soil pulls away from the edge of the foundation. So if you have gutters and downspouts, you really should think about soaker hoses. And soaker hoses are those black hoses that look like sponges. They've got millions of little holes in them. You turn them on and they kind of just weep water out. And you set those about 18 inches away from the house, all the way around the house, and set it up on a timer so that it comes on every day for an hour or however long. You don't want runoff, obviously, but long enough to soak down in the soil. And you want to do it again every day, kind of like your sprinkler system every other day, so that we can water deep down where that clay lives. Some of these expansive clays can be 12, 15 feet down. Some of them aren't. Sometimes you don't have clay. You've got a lot of sand in your area. But we're trying to, if you have clay, and even if you don't, most people don't know what kind of soil they have deep down. But it's part of taking care of your foundation. So think about your downspouts and gutters, and in combination with a sprinkler system or soaker hoses, and you know, you need to look at it all the time. Now, if you're not familiar what foundation movement looks like here in Houston, I mean, it's pretty typical probably across the nation, but here in Houston, because of our post-tension slabs, they're very springy. They have a lot of spring in them, and they can move. Concrete can flex. Concrete's a plastic, so it can move a little bit. So when your foundation moves, anything that sits on top of it moves. So if you have a brick veneer house, it's pretty easy to know if you've got some movement, because if you've got some foundation movement, you're going to see it in the bricks. You're going to see stair-stepping cracks, cracks at a diagonal below or above windows and doors, and we call those racking cracks. You're going to see that same thing in your sheetrock in the house. So I'll go over this in another video about how to know foundation movement, but if you're starting to see some cracks in your sheetrock or your brick, and typically these are diagonal cracks, cracks at an angle, stair-stepping, not so much vertical or horizontal, then you need to start looking into your foundation and give us a call. I'll be glad to talk to you about it over the phone, discuss it. We can come out and take a look at it, whatever you like. So give us a call if you have any questions about foundation maintenance, what you should be doing in your particular situation, because it varies from house to house, from neighborhood to neighborhood. So give us a call or email me. I'll be glad to help you out. So again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, give us a call. Thank you.